Welcome to Exceptional Journeys, an enriching podcast tailored for families and caregivers of neurodivergent individuals. As we embark on this first episode, we invite you to join us on a voyage filled with both professionalism and delight as we navigate through the intricacies of neurodiversity. Throughout the series, we pledge to provide you with invaluable insights, indispensable information, and a wealth of resources to accompany you on your unique journey. I am thrilled to introduce our guests, Georgia Mueller, Nicole Schroeder, and myself, Karen Tennyson. First up, we'll learn about Nicole Schroeder.
So by trade, I am a board certified behavior analyst. However, my background originally started in the field of education. Through that, it has driven me to find passions in the area of helping families navigate new diagnoses as well as educational advocacy and getting kids access to services here in the Kansas City area.
My name's Georgia Mueller, and I coach families to navigate all the disability service systems. And I like to say this is my son's fault. It is my son's fault. My son is 24 years old now. He was diagnosed with moderate autism at the age of 3. And ever since then, I've just been going. I essentially found different ways to serve families in the community. And I actually finally figured out how to get paid to do it. And then I started my own business a couple years ago, and I've never been happier. It's the best decision ever, and just the opportunity to help as many families with as many unique situations as possible is thrilling, really.
I'm Karen Tennyson. I'm a dedicated board-certified behavior analyst specializing in fostering growth and development for individuals aged 1 to 21 on the autism spectrum, with a focus on crafting interventions to enhance communication, nurture social skills, and mitigate maladaptive behaviors. I'm committed to supporting our clients every step of the way. Welcome aboard, and let's embark on this extraordinary journey together.
All right, so today, one of our main topics is going to be, we're going to be talking about how to get a diagnosis. Why do you get a diagnosis? Why is that so important? And this is really the starting foundation for families as they start to embark on this journey. So I figured today we would go ahead and, as Georgia mentioned, she has some personal connections to being on this journey. And so I figured we would start with today just Georgia telling us kind of about her experience of getting her child diagnosed and kind of what led up to that and the kind of the process that you went through.
Sure. So it was quite a journey, no doubt. I knew nothing about autism, had never even heard of it my entire life. All I knew is my son was not doing the typical things that a kiddo his age should have been doing. He suddenly was losing skills, doing a lot of your stereotypical type of ceiling fans, flapping his hands, those kinds of things. My husband and I were definitely in a panic. We kept asking for advice, kept going to doctors, the same doctor over and over again. And frankly, they didn't really send us towards any help to speak of. They were in denial, and we just wanted an answer. And so eventually we got our answer after 9 months of asking for help. We finally got to talk with some therapists who were audiologists, because our doctor thought, well, if we can rule out a hearing impairment, then we'll know what to do next. And they said, well, we think we might have an idea. Do you want to actually hear what we have to say? And they graciously broke protocol and told us exactly what they thought. And as soon as they explained it to us, we were in complete and total agreement. And everybody deals with it differently, but my husband and I are both kind of like, let's just get something done here. And so he did his thing, which is research, and I did my thing, which is finding services to get my son whatever he needed next, in which case he needed First Steps, which is our early intervention in Missouri. We got that for him as quickly as possible. He needed a diagnosis, and back then we could get a diagnosis from a psychologist through our regional center. That is no longer an option, unfortunately, which is why you have backlogs of almost 2 years 1 year through very large hospitals or more. And private practitioners, you can get into them pretty quickly, but you have to pay for them with cash, and they're usually extremely expensive. $2,000 to $3,000 for a diagnosis process, and it's a good quality diagnosis, but still, it's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's how he got diagnosed. We were very worried. I ended up doing stupid stuff like quitting a good job and some things like that, and we just moved on with our life, and but it was back then. It was 22 years ago. Things were a little different.
Right.
We were breaking some ground. Yeah.
So speaking of 22 years ago, your son was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. And at that time, there were some different categories that they were, characterizing individuals in. And now we've just changed the terminology to be autism spectrum disorder. And so you were talking about roughly about 20 years ago. And about 20 years ago, the statistics for individuals being diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder was about 1 in 150 kids.
Mm.
We fast forward to the most recent statistic in the CDC put out in 2021, so even several years ago, and we're now at 1 in 36 children being diagnosed with autism, and roughly 2.3% of the entire U.S. population having that. Those are the ones who have that formal diagnosis of autism.
Right.
So we are seeing the rates rise, and that's why I think that these types of conversations are so important to start having. So today I want to start with first just some simple signs, and feel free to kind of jump in, guys, here. But looking at very, very early on, I'm curious, Georgia, to kind of see. You mentioned a few of these as well that you had seen in your son, but by 6 months that there is kind of a lack of smiling or those engaging expressions, very limited. Or maybe no eye contact, so that reciprocating back of emotions occurs naturally. And so when you start to see a lack in those facial expressions, maybe there was, some concern there. By 12 months, about a year, little to no babbling or making some of those small sounds. You may start to see that there's not any sort of gestures, maybe reaching towards you or waving or kind of not necessarily pointing with your index finger, but kind of like reaching out towards you with different fingers. And, as you go into 16 months, very few, that's when you start to see more small words, mama, dada, very, very typical first words start to develop. Did you have anything, Georgia, that you wanted to kind of add that maybe you noticed at a very, very young age?
So our path looked a little different, and all my friends were different too. We would all share with each other what we saw because we were all now autism parents. It's the club. You never joined,
the club you never asked for.
That's right. But what we did see with our son in particular was actually for the first about 15 months, he was typical. He was developing typically. He had language. He wasn't necessarily stringing words together. He was 15 months old, but he definitely had language, and it was very sudden, right at 15 months when he lost his language. And but he did start doing some weird stuff like toe walking, and I mentioned that hand flapping, and the staring at ceiling fans, and repetitious, rigid types of things. Right. And we did notice that he seriously benefited from things like being put on the swing at the playground. Suddenly, like, his brain would wake up and he would connect with us. And it was very long after that before he actually started verbalizing communication to us that was recognizable by others besides himself.
Right.
We don't know what he was saying before. Some of it we've traced back like to videos and stuff like that.
I'm really glad you brought that up too. That for a while he was appearing that that the skills were that I was mentioning, they were there, and then they weren't.
Yep.
And that is unfortunately something that we do see many parents coming to practitioners saying, but he was doing all this. He had all of this,
Mhm.
and then it was just
Yep.
snap. It was gone. And so that is really, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because that is something that is very, very common to see.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that parents should be receiving from their primary care physician is screenings.
Mm-hmm.
So by the age of 3, there should have been some type of kind of developmental screening that is done, usually in the form of just basic question asking. One of the really common ones that we'll see is the MCHAT, or the Modified Checklist for Autism in Toddlers. That is a very quick rating scale. You can also look that up online. I believe it's actually yes/no questions. And, if you have X number of yeses, then you might want to go talk to your practitioner. Some other really common ones that I've seen before are like the ages and stages, the screening tool for autism in toddlers and young children. But these screening tools, you can usually find most of them online, but your practitioner should be doing these at least by the age of 3.
And we'll be putting these tools on our in our show notes, right?
Correct.
So people can go and you can study them for yourself.
We'll have some links.
Right. And as a parent, I'm going to tell you, that's been probably the most empowering thing for us, is that although we had practitioners who should have been doing these things, they were not,
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reason. I mean, I try not to harbor a lot of hostility towards them even now, but had I had my hands on those checklists, I would have been empowered to ask more questions.
Yeah.
And have a
Absolutely.
much better quality conversation with my kiddo's doctor.
Mm-hmm.
So please empower yourself, and we'll give you those tools.
Yeah, so let's say that your doctor, or you have looked up, as you mentioned, these screening tools online, and these screening tools, based on their directions, say there might be a possible cause for concern. Who can diagnose these, and how do we get this diagnosis? This is very important, and Karen, would you like to share some more information on kind of some of the options for getting a diagnosis?
Yeah, and kind of why we want to get a diagnosis. I think that, an early diagnosis really serves as a cornerstone in laying the foundation for an effective intervention, for comprehensive care. The diagnosis, it empowers individuals, their families, and caregivers with this vital knowledge. It helps enable them to better comprehend the child's unique needs and the challenges faced, that they will face. It's really important to get an early diagnosis. You get that opportunity for individuals and their support networks to get access to a wealth of resources and specialized services. An early diagnosis can promote a culture of understanding and acceptance, kind of dismantling stigmas. So basically, the decision to get an early diagnosis isn't just for recognizing that you're neurodivergent or your child's neurodivergent. It's about embracing the journey towards that empowerment, inclusion, and well-being.
Thanks, Karen. I mean, I think you definitely hit the nail on the head, especially from kind of also kind of a clinician standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So I also kind of want to talk to you, Georgia, about that parent perspective. Why is it so important to explore diagnoses, rule out diagnoses, not even just autism, but there's, many others, ADHD, OCD, other things that we're also looking at through some of these comprehensive evaluations. So why is it important? The earlier, the better.
Sure, absolutely. Well, as I outlined in my original story, I'm not kidding, we spent 9 months going to different practitioners who did not know. They didn't know what they didn't know. I mean, the prevalence rate back then was so low that it didn't occur to them to look for it. And so it was very frustrating as a parent. But had I understood that he would have gotten into first steps 9 months earlier.
That's wild. Yeah.
That's
Right.
insane. When you lose 9 months from somebody who's like 0 to 3, that's a huge chunk.
Yeah.
It's a quarter of your time. The other thing is that it did bring a lot of relief. Just the fact that we now had the answer so we could figure out what to do next instead of running around like chickens with our heads cut off. I made some stupid decisions back before my son was diagnosed because he had these things going on. We couldn't figure out what was going on. And I ended up quitting my job to be home and figure out what he needed. And this is a person, I have a master's degree. I'm not saying that to brag. I'm just saying,
Right.
I have a degree. My job, my intention in life was to have a full career, and it was completely cut short. I had no choice. I had to figure out how to help my son. So I did stop my regular work. And did a little bit of spotty work. And then I ended up going to work to Lowe's Home Improvement from 4 to 10 at night so that my kid could get therapy all day, right?
Yeah.
So we just rearranged our lives around what he needed. My husband worked during the day, and I worked at night, and Caleb got therapy all day long every day because because that's what he needed. So that worked out really well. But I want to actually share another story with you as well that is not my own story, but is somebody else that I helped. So this is what I do for a living, is coach families to navigate the service systems. And one of the earliest families I was able to help had a very young child who was under the age of 1, and he was having an enormous amount of physical and cognitive delays. And he didn't end up having autism per se, but I think they finally gave him an autism diagnosis in there somewhere. Nonetheless, he had a lot of needs, and this family were like go-getters. Mom had a great job. She didn't want to give up her job, and so we figured out how to get them into the one and only Medicaid waiver in the state of Missouri that ignores parental income, and that's the Lopez waiver. It's very, very hard to get, but there's 366 slots across the state that turn over all the time, and this individual's needs were very obvious. So we were able to make the argument for that, and it changed their lives. Really, really changed their lives. And she even said, Had I not met you, I would have lost my job. We would be on full government support. And this way I'm saving I'm finding a way to make up that cost of about $200,000 a year worth of services that my son needs in order to thrive and grow up and be a kid. I'm like, wow, that is a lot of money. And that would be like an annual expense.
Absolutely.
So why find out early? He wasn't even 1. We got him on the waiver. We couldn't get him on the waiver right till like 3, but he got every other kind of intervention we could possibly find between 1 and 3. And again, it changed their family's life and the trajectory of their family's life. That's why I get up and coach families every day.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that story with us and kind of talking about some of the benefits and the why behind trying to get a diagnosis as soon as you can. One thing I kind of want to talk about is after. So you've gone through this comprehensive process. It's been a journey to get there. You've received a diagnosis. Now what? I'm curious. I've found that families oftentimes kind of have to go through a little bit of a grieving process when that diagnosis is given. Karen, can you tell us a little bit more kind of about that?
There's 5 stages of grief, and this is across the board with any incident that you would be grieving. In our case, grieving a diagnosis in your child. You have the whole time you're waiting for the child to arrive, and when the child comes into the world, you've got big goals for this kid. You've already come up with ideas. What happens? You get a diagnosis. A lot of times, one of the parents may be in denial. Maybe one of the parents understands what's going on and they really see it, done a little bit of research. But the other parent may be thinking, well, they're just little. They're just having a hard time, learning to talk or different things like that. All these feelings that come over the parents and make them, angry about the diagnosis. There's a little bit of bargaining that goes on, parents start looking into different things. Maybe there's holistic things that might fix it. Maybe I've got a chiropractor down the street that says that he can help with autism. We start bargaining with all these ideas until we can understand the science, behind it. There's a lot of depression in families that have a family member diagnosed with autism. It's hard. But you have to realize it's okay to feel this way, right? These are all stages that you go through when dealing with anything that isn't necessarily working out the way you had anticipated it to. The final step is that acceptance. At some point, you have to come to an understanding that my child is going to need more supports and is going to need additional resources that other children may not need. Embracing that acceptance doesn't mean you're happy with the diagnosis or that you've forgotten about it. But it does let you move forward and come up with a plan. So let yourself go through these stages. This is perfectly natural, and it gets you to the point where you can accept it and then make those changes.
So, George, I'm curious, from your kind of perspective and some of the work that you've done, I'm sure you've encountered families as of we that are at various stages of, somewhere in potentially this grieving process. What does that look like? What can we do? How can we be proactive as parents at that point?
Grieving too, I want to remind you guys, everybody, grieving is a lifelong process.
Mm-hmm.
And there are things that pop up in my son's life all the time, even 20 years down the road, where I end up having to grieve again for some reason. And that's okay. But I will say that a couple different things. Number one, I do work with Head Start kids also. So a lot of those families, this is very new for them. A lot of times they may be in a situation where they just haven't had exposure to really good health care, for example, and they have not had practitioners who have taken the time to do those screenings and things like that. And so they're spending a lot of time saying, what are you talking about? Why are you bringing this to me? You're just making my life difficult. Things are already hard for me as it is. Unfortunately, when you qualify for Head Start, life is already hard. That's kind of part of the deal, unfortunately. So you've got these families, they're just trying to keep their head above water. And I bring this to them, and they're like, yeah, right, lady. I got no bandwidth for you. And I do have families who will not call me back. And I just have to get on with it. I keep reaching out gently, and that's what you can do. So what else can we do, though, is we definitely need to know each other. When families know each other and we have the opportunity as a community to get together and support each other, it does make that grieving so much better, because now I know I'm not alone. This is not a unique circumstance. I do not have to do this by myself. I'm not the only person whose mother-in-law thinks I'm crazy and I'm not doing it right. There's unfortunately a lot of family infighting that's happening here. With you've got cultures and traditions about doing things and responding to situations, and they don't always jive with what that child needs or what the immediate family needs. And so we have to be really honest and recognize that everybody needs something different, and we all need to respect each other. But one of the best ways to teach families to gain that respect and be, hey, I'm the parent and nobody else here is to arm themselves with information. And one of the best places to get information is from other families. So I want families to know each other. I connect families constantly with each other. I want people to know each other because they're going to empower you. Then the other thing is, of course, the information that you're getting from your practitioners. I want them to sit in on the therapy sessions. Like therapy in a closet doesn't actually do anything. You need to actually sit down with your kiddo and their therapist when they're doing whatever it is and learn whatever you can. And when your kiddo's teacher brings you information on, say, conscious discipline, which is one of my new favorites. I can't believe I ever said that. So I didn't believe, I was a naysayer for years. But when they bring you information on conscious discipline, read it, people. Please read it. You will understand your kid better. And you'll understand yourself better. So if I can control my own response to situations, my child's opportunity to learn from that situation increases, as does mine. But when I emotionally react to everything that's in front of me, I'm not actually going to be able to change that situation. I'm going to make it worse. So parents knowing each other and knowing the information that is available to them and using it and asking someone to teach you about it. If they hand it to you and it doesn't make sense and it's gibberish, please ask for help. They need to explain it to you, not just hand you a bunch of flyers and walk away.
Yeah, that is a very great description. A lot of times I will have families that come to me, and this is one area that I really love, is helping families who get that new diagnosis. What do we do with this 30-page report that has all these statistics, all these numbers, and at least 2 pages of recommendations? It is not your responsibility to know what to do with that information as a parent. We just don't know what we don't know. And so talking to people in your community, I know I brought up Facebook earlier and it sounds really silly, but there is such an active Autism Support Kansas City is such an active page here. You know, if you're listening here in the Kansas City area, to get on, to search on that page, you will find so many questions, so many parents wanting to hang out, so many parents going through the same things that you are. But kind of going back to that diagnostic report, ask somebody to explain what all of that is. That is one of my favorite things to do as, a consultant, is to explain those numbers. And then also, what are we going to do with these 2 pages of recommendations at the end of this report? Where do we start? Where do we start with these, and how do we prioritize? So ask somebody, find an educational advocate, find a consultant, find somebody through your school district, ask the individual who did the comprehensive exam to not just sit down and go through with you all the numbers. Like you probably will get that, right? But how do you just told me I need these 2 pages of services. Where do I start? Who do I contact? How do I prioritize? I have other children, I have a job, etc. We're going to get into all that here in a little bit, but ask them to give you an explanation, to explain more than just the science, just the numbers. Ask them to either help you with next steps or put you in contact with somebody that can help you with the next steps, because it is not your responsibility or the expectation that you are going to magically know all of this information. So we have to reach out to resources and we have to utilize the community that is around us.
That's absolutely right. There is so much information for us to go over. We are going to go ahead and finish up this first segment of this podcast, and we're going to have a part 2 where we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this and talk about, self-awareness, diagnosis, pros, cons, adults that are diagnosed, unraveling some myths. So we would love for you to join us on our next podcast where we will continue this discussion. We really appreciate you joining us. Thank you.